welcome everybody to this this tent to hear about regenerative viticulture in the UK. I was lucky enough to come to Groundswell last year for the first time. I'm a wine guy, and I think the viticulture sector has quite a lot to learn from agriculture when it comes to thinking about farming regeneratively, because viticulture in the UK is very new. And we thought we'd try and run a session this time to be interesting to people who were farmers who just wanted to understand a bit more about viticulture and what that might mean. So I'm quite interested to understand who we have here. So anyone who's already in the wine business in some way, could you put your hand up? So yeah, there's a lot more than last year, wine folk at Groundswell, which is good to see. Anyone who is not in the wine business but is a farmer, please put your hand up. Okay, good, okay. So one of the questions I think we're going to try and answer is, should you be thinking about planting a vineyard? And if you do, should you be thinking about doing it regeneratively? So I hope at the end of this session we're going to have some answers for that question. The answer isn't a simple one, but let me go. So I'm going to first of all just introduce him. I am Justin Howard-Sneyd. I am one of the trustees of a new foundation called the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. That has been formed as a charity. It's an international charity. It is UK based because we have several of our original founders are UK based, but we have people from around the world, several trustees here in the audience, Jesper from Denmark, Mimi from Oregon, who's with us here on the stage, and many others. So we are setting ourselves up to promote. So just before I get into that, I'm just going to introduce the panel. So we do have Mimi Casteel. We're very excited to have her over here. She doesn't travel to Europe that often. She's here for a week, and she's from Oregon. And she's probably, if you had to say on your list of top 10 regenerative viticulturists around the world, she's probably number one. She's been doing it for a very long time, and she's very experienced. And she's originally a forestry PhD, living on a family wine farm, went to farm her own land, and has a great deal of experience and insight, which she's going to talk to us about. We then have Frédéric Thomas. Now, Frédéric is very well known to Groundswell. I think he's a highly acknowledged and experienced speaker and consultant in the regenerative sphere. But he's, while primarily an agriculturalist, he's also quite experienced in viticulture. He has viticulture clients in France and also one in the UK, which is Simon Porter sitting next to him, who planted a vineyard getting on for 5 years ago now, 5 years ago. And so Simon is also here to tell us about his experience of how he went about planting that vineyard. And then last of all, we have Abby Rose, who I think is known to many of you as the founder of, one of the co-founders of Farmerama podcast, and also quite involved in the viticulture sector. She has an app, Sector Mentor, which is adapted for helping viticulturists to farm in a regenerative way. So this is our panel. And I'm not going to further introduce them. We're going to just go one person to the other all the way down. We're going to talk for about 45 minutes, I think, and hopefully we'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions, unless we digress a bit more than we're planning to, which I already have. So the foundation is set up. I'm really embarrassed about this because Rachel did send me her photograph a couple of days ago, but it was after I'd sent the presentation into Groundswell, and I haven't managed to get it updated. So here we have the trustees plus Becky. Becky's also here in the front row. She's our first employee, and we now have funding from a bunch of people who, mostly in the wine sector, mostly, you probably can't read all the logos from there, but we've got people like Moet Hennessy, we've got the Jackson family, Vineyards, we've got Decanter Magazine, Berry Brothers and Rudd, people like that who really want to see the wine sector progress in this direction, and they've kindly funded us so that we can progress and do our work and hire our first employee. Our mission is to support a transition away from conventional viticulture, which is monocultural and is largely chemical based, towards a more regenerative way of farming. And we want to see eventually that regenerative is seen as being the mainstream way of thinking about farming grapes. That's the mission that we have. So, little snapshot about viticulture in the UK. I promise not to move around because they're doing the filming, so I will try and stand still. Viticulture in the UK, what's it all about? Back in the late 80s, we probably reached the dip of viticulture. There was a boom of planting grapes after the war. A couple of pioneers started planting grapes. There came a lot of English people who'd been working in the army in Germany, rather like German wine, came back and thought, I've got some land in Hampshire, I'll plant a couple of hectares of vines. Then it sort of declined a bit because English wine wasn't people's favourite drink. until the first pioneers started making really very good sparkling wine in the late 80s, early 90s. And then the numbers started to come up. So we're down to 600 hectares of vines. We're now well, the latest guess as to exactly how much we've got planted this day is nearly 5,000 hectares. And you can see quite how quickly that's ramped up in the last few years. There's been a bit of a gold rush. And one of the things I just want to kind of flag is that we may have more vines in the ground than we actually need right now, and the sales are not quite tracking as fast. So just bear in mind, anyone thinking this is the license to print money, what do I get for wheat? Nothing. What do I get for vines? Yeah, here we go. So you'll get between 2 and 8 tons per hectare. You can get a bit more. You can get 0 if you lose your crop, which is it's not uncommon. But if you're really farming incredibly small scale, you might be only getting 2. If you're very efficient, you might be getting regularly as much as 8. But 5 is the UK average at the moment. You can sell your grapes at the moment for between £2,000 and £3,000 a tonne. Some more, some less, but good quality grapes at that kind of price, which sounds quite good. But those prices are pretty firm because wineries have been undersupplied. There haven't been enough grapes, and they're kind of overpaying at the moment. So actually, think about the cost of farming: £7,000 to £20,000 a hectare. That again depends on your scale, depends on your equipment and your expertise and how much you have to hire in. You can quite quickly work out if you're selling your grapes at 2,000 and it's costing you 20,000 to grow them, and you've only got 5 tons a hectare, you're not going to make any money. So it's difficult to make money as a grape grower. There's also an increasing amount of legislative and consumer pressure to reduce chemical use, but grapevines are incredibly susceptible to fungal diseases, and therefore quite reliant on chemical use. Quite a lot of spraying goes on in vineyards, and that's something that we'd love to see reduced, but it is hard to grow grapes without a certain amount of treatment, either organic treatments or conventional treatments, but even the organic treatments can be negative for your soil health. That's why you use them to kill fungal cells, and there are various different ways of thinking about that, but it's not easy to grow grapes without quite a lot of work and chemical use. The climate is tricky, but it has got a lot better. And what else? Yeah, regenerative is not yet proven, and I can see a couple of people dotted around the audience who are practicing regenerative techniques at the moment, but it's only been a few years at most. So we haven't got a copper-bottomed guaranteed way you can definitely grow healthy grapes regeneratively yet. I hope we will do in a few years' time, and one of the foundation's desires is to make the scientific case that it can be done and to prove that it can be done. Very briefly, ways of farming: conventional, sustainable, organic, biodynamic. These are kind of almost certification levels. It's a slightly false paradigm to say that it's a pyramid and biodynamic or organic is always above sustainable. But it's worth remembering that less than 1% of vineyards around the world are biodynamic, only about 6% are organic, maybe 20% have signed up to some form of sustainability scheme. So I can see people trying to take photographs of the slides. I'm going to move this one on to a similar slide, which basically has our feeling that all of these ways of growing grapes can learn from the regenerative movement and from how to improve your soil health. Something we heard at one of the sessions I was at earlier on was very much, this is a message to all farmers. All farmers can improve what they do by thinking more about their soil health. So by improving your soil health, each of these levels of certification can improve. And yeah, that's the last slide also says even if you're organic, you can actually have bad soil health if you plough a lot as your main method of controlling weeds, and if you use a lot of copper, which is one of the main organic approved chemicals that you're allowed to use in the vineyard. So soil health is not necessarily related to these levels, and we think regenerative has a method to play. This is a small list of people, and a growing list of people who are using at least some regenerative practices in their vineyards in the UK. It's mostly fairly small people, but there's quite a lot of bigger producers I haven't put on this slide because I don't think they could class themselves as regenerative producers, but they are experimenting. They are trying lots of different things with cover crops, with biochar, with animals in the vineyards. Sometimes it's just for Instagram, some it's for life, but we're hoping to change the minds of the big people as well as having the small people kind of lead the way. So that is everything I've got to say. I'm going to pass on to people much more interesting and expert than I am. So Mimi Casteel, I've already told you all about Mimi. Mimi, take the mic.
Hi. Thank you, Justin, and thank you all. I'm shocked at how many people are here. So I'm from Oregon, and if you don't know where that is, it's just above California in the United States. And I think I'm going to make Justin very nervous by probably not using any of my slides. I will flip through them, but I feel like it might be most beneficial for me to just kind of share an Oregon, we call it regenerative now, but I didn't call it that when I got started. So my background is my parents founded one of the earliest wine estates in Oregon. Interestingly, when we got started, Oregon was about, the number of vineyards and wineries in Oregon was about the same size as the UK is now. We were considered a cool climate. We are still calling ourselves a cool climate. But I would say compared to the UK, we started warmer and we have gotten profoundly warmer. We're strictly Mediterranean in our growing season. So we still call June January because we get rain and cold weather in June. But more and more, our seasons are sort of profoundly affected by heat. So I feel like Oregon can kind of be a cautionary tale. Not that you're going to go that direction, but that there's a lot to learn from an industry that got started very much as an underdog. I mean, people still ask me where in California Oregon is. And we built a, sort of world-renowned region for wine. And we could very easily lose that as quickly as we built it because of our practices. And to me, it's only interesting because wine being and viticulture being such a tiny slice of the agricultural pie, we don't represent a lot of the worst damage being done by agriculture, but we do have one of the most profound platforms and voices in all of agriculture because we represent the highest reaches of value-added agriculture. And a lot of people believe that we're just rolling in money. And I'm here to tell you that if that is why you came to this, you can just leave now. You should not embark upon any type of viticulture in any region of the world unless you feel a burning desire to do it and make something profound from where you are from. So I'm gonna see if this thing will even work for me, but I'm gonna just blow through these because it's not as interesting as what I think I can actually add here in terms of value. But one thing to note about Vitis vinifera specifically, because it does have unique challenges here, is that evolutionarily, it was built into something, and then we pushed it through a very tight funnel of cultural selection based on traits that we find desirable in wine, and that has made it vulnerable because it lost genes that made it resistant to certain things, specifically here, downy mildew, which I do not have. I've never used copper in my viticulture. I mean, a lot of my colleagues do use copper, but that is a very sticky wicket when it comes to managing organically specifically, but regeneratively also. I'm organic and regenerative, and that has many definitions now, and we're not going to get into that debate. But in Oregon, in the late 70s, one of our great pioneers, David Lett, submitted one of his Pinot Noirs, one of his earliest Pinot Noirs, to the grand tasting in Paris and took third in a blind tasting with the greatest Burgundies. And that was really the beginning of the building of an iconic wine region. And it was a total accident, kind of. I mean, he submitted it on a lark. I mean, believing that he would just learn something really and probably get his ass handed to him. And that really woke up the world to what was possible in Oregon. And interestingly, that was when our viticulture looked nothing like this. But because, as we are often wont to do, we felt that we needed to build a wine region based on or drawing upon the greatest traditions in viticulture. When Robert Drouhin tasted that wine and decided that it might be interesting to look at purchasing some land in Oregon, the French way of doing viticulture started to permeate Oregon. And in a lot of ways, that was the beginning of the worst practices that we now use. So there's a lot of plowing in viticulture now. When I was growing up, there was none. We didn't hardly ever spray, and sulfur was our only control for powdery mildew, and we do have significant powdery mildew pressure. We can easily lose 80% of our crop in a really bad year. So putting vines into nice, tidy, tight, upright photovoltaic rows with nothing growing on the ground, it looks like what you would expect to see in Burgundy, and I think that that was the way it was done because it was very sexy to look like Burgundy, but in a lot of ways it caused more problems than it solved. And our wines have become more concentrated, but we also were making new choices with our viticulture. We were a true cool climate back then. Our growing degree days were roughly just over 1,000. We now easily get close to 2,000 in our hottest years. And I think that if I were going to share what I think might be helpful advice for anyone in the UK who's thinking about planting a vineyard, making wine, be very thoughtful about how you choose to build the architecture of your place. Because if there is a reason to make wine anywhere in the world, it's because it's where you are is capable of something that's not possible anywhere else. And that might be true to the block level, but you will never know that if you go about stripping away everything that built that place in the first place. So when I came back to viticulture, it was really to see what we lean on so heavily in terms of using this word terroir and how we've gone around the world showing people hands full of dead soil and talking about how our rocks make our wine special. That is so fake, and it's what's ruining wine. The real ceiling on terroir is the biology, the life that built the place that you're from. And if you don't respect what that is, then you could grow it in a parking lot. And that's possible, but it's profoundly uninteresting. And this is not going to be a region, no matter what you do, that's ever going to be suitable for mass production wine. Your yields are never going to be that big because it's just not warm enough. You don't have a generous enough of a climate. So I would embrace everything that is unique about what you have here. In particular, the native habitat that you inherit. And if it's gone, put it back. Maybe do that before you plant your vines. And if I were going to do everything over again, and I think about that all the time, if somebody were going to hand me a magic wand, the vines would be the last thing that go in the ground. And I would do rootstock first, and I would choose your rootstocks very wisely. We chose rootstocks, when we were replanting vineyards because of phylloxera. We chose rootstocks that were devigorating, that would ripen earlier. That might seem like a really good idea to you right now. But again, I think that even if you choose devigorating rootstocks, put them in the ground and let them grow for several years before you graft onto them the varieties that you think are suitable for your site. The reason being that developing that architecture that will support the plant for a lifetime that is not 15 to 20 years, that's money in the bank. I mean, that's something that I really wish more people would consider. So none of this is a short-term turnaround on your investment, right? And I think that, this is just to show what I believe a vineyard should look like, which is full of life. And as we, as I grew through my experience at Hopewell, the more native plants came back into our system, because mine was a wasteland. I was so keen to rebuild something that was a devastated Christmas tree farm. But as the native plants were able to return, our wines got more and more interesting. And I will share anything with anyone who ever wants to know specifically what I did, but you're going to have to figure this out on your own. And if you want to, you will. but it's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to try a lot of different things, especially with the disease control. And I would think about planting things that have a lot of essential oils like rosemary or oregano, or things that will be a natural physical barrier to your worst enemy, and use as much of that as you possibly can to protect yourself exogenously without extra chemistry, if that makes sense. Am I over time yet? Getting there. Okay, shut up, Mimi. Okay. Anyway, this thing isn't working. I have no idea what my next slide was. Eventually, we're going to get there. It's going to fast forward. But what I really want to say, so in Oregon, it is now textbook. You come in, you clear all the habitat, you rip to 6 feet several times. There is no force in nature that disturbs soil so violently as we do in our development process. And if you remove all the trees, that is your rooting depth, that is the depth of your water table. And even in a place like this, and I know it's hard to believe right now, but even if you get wetter, do not let go of your water holding capacity. Do not artificially drain your land, because what we are going to experience as we go forward with climate change is no matter what your rainfall pattern changes to, you're going to have extreme amounts of water in very short periods of time. And so use the physical structures that nature put in place to build a water table that can absorb that for you, because water is also your biggest thermal regulator. If it gets to be 120 degrees Fahrenheit, like it did in Oregon in June in 2021, we, with permanent cover and no artificial drain tiles, had 60 degrees cooler temperatures at the soil. So this is a biological difference, right? Nothing lives when it's above 200 degrees. People were killing their soils just because they plowed, because they saw that heat dome coming. And conversely, if it gets very, very cold and you have living soils, they buffer that extreme temperature of cold as well. So don't give up the things that you already have. This is a place where you already have some pretty healthy, biologically diverse soils. Add to that. Put back whatever has been removed in whatever other type of agriculture you may have been practicing before. But I will just end by saying, if you want to make great wine here, it's pretty clear to me that you're going to, and you already are. If you want to make extraordinary wine, you're going to have to so much love where you are and so much love the act of making wine, because nobody will make wine better than you if you love where you're from and you maintain the integrity of what built that place. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry to be French and cereal, not be French, but being a cereal farmer and talking about the wine industry. We start by, if this will work, and over there, okay. Let's see. We're gonna try to make things working. Okay. Basically, I mean, I didn't start in the wine industry. I started in the cereal industry, and if I can make it work, maybe you do. Okay, that's good, Simon. Okay, and then because I'm 25 years ago, we start having problems of soil, so we start going no-till, and no-till on cover crop, and it's how my field could looks like when I plant winter barley on cover crop. So we got rid of the tillage and got more on a soils approach. And at that time, we were a bit shocked in our head because we were looking for the right machinery in order to do direct drilling. But then we found if the machinery want to work well, the trick was to have great soils. And you have to have good soils in order to make the no-till works. So we were a bit caught in the way to developing better soil, and very very soon this should work. As there is a lot of vineyards all across the country in France. I mean, we got across looking at other fields, and basically, as you described, maybe it was a bit empty, and we found that not much was going here. I took that in Montpellier area. That's the Salagou Lake. It is in March, and well, no photosynthesis, no nothing, and then when we look at it in Saint-Emilion area, it is a young vine that is will probably be sold at very heavy price as a bottle. When you look at that, people are talking about terroir, and well, terroir, we are going far away taking care of the soil, and then we got to some contacts, and thanks Simon, and all the studies that have been across the country really show that the verger, which is a orchard, and the vine and the vigne, which is the vineyards, I mean the organic matter and the soil life in those areas are very low. Maybe they are very low at first stage because we usually grow vine in very poor land, okay? But the way we manage land really get it way poorer than that. And we found out the same thing as in arable farming. By the time you do some tillage, and this was taken in Cahors, and they till every other row, and you see that how the water was getting inside the ground, and the top was really mud, one more, but the water was not getting deep in the ground. So it really changed the way you manage the water. Okay, the vine is supposed to be able to manage with very less water, but then if you waste water during the winter, you may lack water during the summer. Next one. And we found ourselves very easy because it was a different crop, basically. I mean, and next one. And then I will put orchard, vineyard on the same deal. This is a plum tree orchard in Lot-et-Garonne, and if we look at the quality of the soil on a row, because everybody is organized to see the soil's got to be fertile, and we bring fertilizer, we bring compost on a row. But when you look at on my spade, the quality of the soil on a row and the quality of soil on the inter-row where we had grasses is completely different. And the farmers was not able to tell me, well, it is just because my soil is no good. No, I mean, you made up the difference. Okay, you made up the difference. By trying to make your soil good, you made it bad. And by forgetting your soil in the middle, well, it got better. So, well, you have to change your mind and do differently. And we also find out, by the way, that managing soil that way, we got the roots going up in the ground, so that you don't get all the fertility you should be able to get, and your plant are getting very sensitive to drought because the rooting is very too much in the above ground, and sometimes some viticultures say, well, because the roots, the grafting is superficial. No. It's the way you manage soil, the way you manage the fertility will have a bigger effect on the roots. Thanks, Simon. And we have another problem completely different from yours, that then we have been farming vine at the same place for hundreds of years, and we're still doing the same way. And this means that the diseases that we have, the bugs that we have, well, I mean, we are been cultivating them for many, many years. And it's a completely different concept from looking at the vine in New World. And sorry, I will look at England as the new world for wineries if it's its old country. But France, I mean, we are whole country and whole world, and for many years. And it is monoculture of grape. Lack of diversity, a great lack of diversity. So we have to introduce, thanks to the multiple plant we can put into it, and there is plenty of plants, we can introduce a lot of diversity in our fields, a lot of diversity, and not only think about soil, think about the diversity you can introduce to develop the soil fertility. And when I look at cover crop, in your part of the world, it will be keeping the fertility and the goodness of your soil. In our part of our world, it will be really regenerating the soil. And I like to replace the still by the roots, the fuel by the photosynthesis. A big part of the nitrogen you may need by the nodules of the legume, and the agrochemicals by the biodiversity. That's a little bit what I aim when I put cover crop in different scene. And what we see, and next one, that by competing with the vine roots, we're getting the roots of the vine deeper and deeper, because there is different horizon, and they are really competing. Sorry, one didn't work. And that's, oof, you're going too fast, Simon. Go back. Go back a little bit.
It doesn't always go.
Yeah. Okay. It's difficult. Okay. And the second thing, getting the roots deeper, it's also having a kind of heavy vegetation, and a vegetation that is a low carbon vegetation that stimulates the soil life to degrade all the leaves and all the berries, all the wood that you will leave on the top of the soil, in order to reduce the inoculation of the problems that you can carry out. And I took this picture in the vineyard in Charente when you are in March, and you can see the berries standing on the soil from the previous harvest in October. Well, you may worry, because your problem is there, just waiting to jump back onto the leaves and back onto the berries. But if you bury the berries, is it correct English? Okay. With green vegetation, and feed the soil life that they can really feed on them, and they will reduce the inoculation and reduce the need of keeping coming with agrochemicals. Next one, we found out also, because we're coming from most vine are in very dry area, by covering the soil, you can really reduce the temperature of the soil. Next, there is few figures, and this very red soil, it's taken in Valence, south of Lyon. The red part, it was plowed. It's in the middle of the afternoon of September. The outside temperature is 31, and the red part is 47 degrees, and the cover crop, the dark part, is only 29 degrees. So we are 20 degrees difference in between those two, 20 degrees difference. Okay, and this high temperature is really cooking the soil and killing your soil life. And it's also harming the way you will manage all the water that will arrive. And so we can do a big difference into that system. Okay, then we got the temperature coming. Simon, you're doing a good job. And this is infrared picture of the vineyard, and you really see the difference in between the clean row and where there is the grass. And I put a picture of temperature in the city with and without trees, so everyone has to put more green into that system. And also, a lot of farmers or viticulturists in France are worried about the frost, and say, well, by the time you put cover crop, the risk of frost increase. And thanks to Vincent Lamache in Cahors, and we started by taking different with sensors, the temperature sensors, different temperature, according you roll or you don't roll the cover crop, and it is quite amazing. We see big difference, but on the opposite, and I'm sure we will really remanage the weather or the small impact of the cover crop inside the vineyards, and probably bring protection from spring frost. So that is something that is quite interesting, because in 2 years ago we had in April a very hard spring frost in the vineyards. And then if we want to go forward, you have to sometime reorganize completely the way you plant vine. And then well, I will give a hand the microphone to Simon Porter, that was first a farmer, and that started to plant vine, and well, he accepted to change his mind how to plant it, and it's quite interesting to see what is you have done. So now it's up to you.
I think the first thing I ought to say is that I'm actually English. And it's okay to be English here on this stage. Well, Pencroff started its journey down what is called regenerative farming. Let me just take this on a bit. Down regenerative farming in the year 2000. And in 2014, we fully embraced all sorts of things like, thanks.
I can hold the paper if you want.
Yeah. You want to hold that one? Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, see if you do it as well as I did it. We fully embrace all sorts of things like mixed varieties of crops and cover cropping and direct drilling and lots of other agronomic changes, and saw an immediate result in improved soil health, leading to improved plant health. And that convinced me that my entry into vines needed to have the same regenerative principles. Perhaps move on. For some years, I'd wanted a small vineyard, and in 2018 it was the time to plant it. And I'd known Steve Townsend for many years, and through him and through Base UK I'd known Frédéric, and I became aware of Frédéric's interest in regenerative viticulture. And so the rest is history, as they say. He came and described to me his own design for a regenerative vineyard starting from scratch, and so that's what we did. So you saw the picture before. Frédéric, too fast. Can you go back, please? Just to get my own back. Thank you. So that was the vineyard where we planted it. We planted it after cereals into a cover crop, overwintered cover crop, and we simply sprayed out the cover crop where we wanted the vines to go. Okay, thank you. We designed lots of room between the vine rows for cover crops, and to also possibly grow other cash crops in the future. The wider rows also make a huge difference in reducing humidity, and by having a lot of sunshine and a lot of air movement. And we also adopted the Scott Henry cane system to gain extra sunlight by having a more open canopy, whilst replacing some of the lost production from wide rows. If you don't know what the Scott Henry cane system is, that's your homework when you get home. If plant health is about having healthy, well-balanced soil that is full of biology, plus good air movement and sunlight, then all of the above ideas that you're seeing there, I believe, contribute to that ideal. So we found one vineyard company that was also excited about planting a vineyard differently once they had seen the quality of our soil. And then they were prepared to plant by hand into our soil without any ploughing or any cultivations. That is unknown in the UK. They all wanted to plough deeply. They all wanted to deep cultivate. They all wanted to power harrow. They all wanted to wreck my soil that I had looked after for 20 years, and I wasn't going to let them do it. So that's what we've got. Any more pictures just to go on, Frédéric, please?
I'm trying. Okay.
So that's a cover crop in about the first year we had. We just used mustard on that occasion to get a lot of a lot of organic matter back in, and keep going. So that's what I mean by good soil. That's not actually in the vineyard, but I expect to be walking across my soil in throughout the autumn and the winter and seeing earthworm casts that, well, I tease people, I need a stepladder to get over them. I'm joking, but I expect to see the soil covered in earthworm casts, and I expect to dig the soil and see it like that with holes and earthworms. And the next one, plenty of roots and plenty of activities. And the right hand, or to me, yes, the right hand slide, you will see if you look close enough, it's full of invertebrates and biology, things that I have seen in my soil in the last year or two that I have never seen ever before in my soil. And it's just stunning. And if you ever come to Pencroft, let me warn you, I will take my spade into the field and I will make you sniff the soil. That's part of the induction to Pencroft. Okay. So lessons learnt, which is something that Justin asked me to consider. We may not have needed to have planted quite as wide as we have. Better care and management is needed to oversee the planting team to avoid roots being turned upwards as the vines are placed into the augured hole. We had some losses there. And make sure your organic matter is largely sorted before planting. There's a picture of us putting some wood chip compost on this year to the vines to improve our organic matter, because we had a winter loss of our cover crop due to an early frost. And so at Frédéric's recommendation, we're putting on wood chip there, which we just put on about 2 months ago. So lessons learned, benefits we are currently enjoying. Good diversity from having a scruffy vineyard. Who likes scruffy farms and scruffy vineyards? I do. Long tussocky grass and wild flowers around. If you can keep it on that one for the moment, please. Reduced chemical applications are some of the benefits. Wonderful soil that is still improving. And we're also able to use our existing farm equipment for most of our vineyard work, except for the sprayer. The grapes are from last year's first full harvest were described by the winemaker as being as good as his best grapes that he had that year. So we have a commercial winery that takes grapes in from most of the south of England as well. And we've got lots of experimenting going on. We've got here in the middle one, we've got living mulch growing under one of the vine rows, different clovers and plants coming up. On the right-hand one, we've got wildflowers. It was a recommendation that Frédéric made with to improve biodiversity. And on the left-hand one, I think you recommended this one as well, Frédéric. It's funny that. But we have left our cover crop, instead of mulching it, we have left it high. And then that was a cover crop of clover and winter barley. And we have then rolled it about 3 weeks ago and create a thatch. And it's amazing. You can tell by putting your hand on the soil under the thatch of cover crop compared to where we've cut the cover crop. I anticipate a good 10 degrees difference in soil temperature. So lots of experimenting going on, trace elements going on to the vines as well. What comes next? That's okay. I think the last one may not stay there. Will it go back one? Yeah. So there's a picture of last year cutting one of our cover crops of clover and Phacelia and something else, and creating a mulch under the vines where we need it. That keeps the weeds at bay. We don't have to spray for weeds. We don't have to cultivate for weeds. Perish the thought. And that high mound of mulch by this February had completely disappeared into the soil. So, advice to new entrants. Virtually my final point. Please get the right advice for your soil. Does it need cultivations? Please get the right advice on soil constituents and availability or lockup. We use Steve Townsend for that and James Warren to help us in understanding that. Don't just talk to people who always suggest the same answers and the same way of doing things. I've had people come around our vineyard and they say, why did nobody tell me I could do something different? probably because I hadn't spoken to Frédéric, and learn from the advice that Regenerative Viticulture Foundation can give you. So in conclusion, and I think this is my last slide as well, in conclusion, Einstein is attributed with saying insanity is doing the same thing over and over again while expecting different results. It's not quite the same, but planting vines in the same conventional way, which leads to high disease, and not trying to do something different may not be very far short of insanity. Certainly a little foolish in my thoughts. There is a risk of stepping out into the unknown, but I did that with arable farming 20 years ago. It's worked. I'm expecting the same thing to happen with our viticulture. Thank you.
I can have a go. Okay. Oh, yeah. Ooh. Okay, so thank you all. You might have to do it. Oh, no, we're getting there. Thank you all. That was super interesting, and I'll be a little quick so that we can have some Q&A here. I'm just going to share a bit about, I guess it's picking up on a few of the themes you've brought up, and then showing a bit of data that's specific to the UK context, to give you an idea of what's happening here already, I guess. So, ooh, it is moving forward without me touching it. Okay. So, yeah, I started a company called Viticycle. My family do actually farm. We have vines in Chile, so not here in the UK. But I work with many UK vineyards. We make this tool called Sector Mentor. For those of you who know us with our soil mentor hat on, it's very similar. We help people monitoring soil health and biodiversity. Alongside that, we have some very specific viticultural tools. And one of the exciting things for me about working in the viticulture sector is that there is a strong emphasis on observation. Even in the conventional world, there's still a strong emphasis on observation. And I think that aspect to it is exciting, because it is actually a great starting place to move in a regenerative direction. I think the more you're observing and looking, the more you're picking up on many of the things that you were all talking about, and starting to ask questions. And so really with the app, we're supporting people to have those observations count and then believe in their own observations. A bit like Simon was saying, you know, you don't have to just follow the what everyone else is doing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about one or two of the tools we developed. We very much develop things in collaboration with viticulturalists on the ground. So the first one, oh no, I need to do that. Oh, no, I've gone to the end. Thank you. Are you changing it for me? Oh, thanks. Okay, great. So the first one I wanted to talk about was we developed this tool with Will Davenport. So he's been farming in the UK, growing vines in the UK for about 25 years now. And he is, he's not always that open to visitors, but if you can get a visit, I would highly recommend it. Because he's an incredibly knowledgeable viticulturalist. He has a lot of experience with UK viticulture. He's been organic for something like 18 or maybe almost 20 years. And he's actually been focusing on a more regenerative approach for at least the last 10 years. Just naturally, it wasn't like he was following a movement, but he has been taking that approach, and you can see the cover in his vineyard. Anyway, one of the things I learned early on from him was the value of something that's called pruning weights. It's just literally measuring. You have sample areas that you measure the weight of the prunings year on year. And it's really important to then compare how do my pruning weights this year compare to my pruning weights last year for that exact same location or area. And the reason that that's important in viticulture is it's telling you something about the vigor or the health of that vine. And it's giving you a very early indication that the health of the vine might be declining over time. If your pruning weights are going down, it's actually something that often isn't visible, but it's just telling you, oh, that vine there's a bit of trouble in that area. You need to investigate what's going on. So we created something called the Vine Health Indicator. Very simple, but it just shows you the trends of your pruning weights year on year. And one of the reasons I love this tool is because to me, it is a core of a regenerative approach. It's a very forward-thinking and proactive way of understanding health of what's going on out there. And I think that's something that, if you are going to take a more regenerative approach, I don't know if you guys agree, but it is about like not just being reactive to an issue arising, but it's thinking ahead. How can we make it so that our vines don't get to a disease-prone or pest-prone situation in the first place? So you're really looking to build the health rather than kill the disease, let's say. And maybe I'll just go, I won't talk about the next one, skip that one, and then we'll just talk about this one graph here, which I think is interesting because it's real UK data. I'm pretty sure it's from the Downport Vineyard, so maybe he's from 95. Anyway, it goes from 95 up until very recently. And what it is showing you is the harvesting program or harvesting dates of vines in the UK. So the lighter colored lines are further in the past, and the darker colored lines are closer to today. And so I just think this is an interesting, all of you were referring to temperature differences and shifting climatic conditions. And this here is true data for the UK, which shows you that actually the harvest dates have shifted by about a month since 1995 on a single site. So that is pretty insane. And it's a real indication of the changing climatic and changing situations here. So it just further shows the importance of buffering your soils or having your soils be a buffer so that you can, obviously for grapes it's great because they're harvesting earlier and getting more sun earlier, but for other things it can be much more pressure to the vines. And then I'll just leave it there and then go to questions.
Hello, Abby. I'm aware you've got a soil safari to go and do at 3 o'clock. So Abby's actually going to leave us now. So if you need to ask her questions, find her later on. Thanks very much, Abby. That's great. Thank you. So we've cleverly only left you 5 minutes for the tricky questions that anyone here might have. I'd love to have. We have a question over here, gentleman over there. There's a microphone coming your way, so just bear with. You've all got a microphone in front of you, so if you are asked the question, you can answer on your own mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the use of a crimp roller in viticulture. I understand the concept of a crimp roller in arable situation, i.e. to lay down the cover crop and then plant your cash crop through it. But I'm a little bit puzzled as to what the advantages might be in a viticultural situation.
Yeah. Do you want to answer? Well, for us, it was simply to create a thatch with the cover crop, so we are reducing the heat on the soil and thus keeping more moisture in the soil, and more importantly than that, we are keeping all the soil biology active through the summer months. That's worth a lot of money in my book. We didn't use a crimper roller, we used a flat roller, but as it was. But.
Can I add a little thing on that? I think it will be, and it is a lot more easy in viticulture than in cereal farming, because you can accept that some of the cover crops stay alive. And when you are planting corn or when you are planting barley or other kind, you're putting a seed. And you got to be a lot more cautious about the amount of plant that is surviving, and you don't want any survival. And in the vineyards, I mean, you can go a long way with some plants still surviving into the system. So I think it is a very interesting way to manage a lot better the soil temperature and the water, which mean if I go back to my country, where if you go in Charente, for example, where the soil are very shallow, and we got 900 millimeters during the winter, we can grow a big amount of biomass with this water that's getting through the soil, and use this water and to produce this biomass in order to save water during the summer by limiting evaporation and also limiting the soil temperature. And it is very efficient.
With the use of the crimp roller, that if you're growing a stand of cover crop which is multi-species, that by using the crimp roller, you would be laying down some of the taller species and thus increasing ventilation in your vineyard, which is obviously very important from a moisture point of view and disease point of view, but also allowing some of the other species that are lower growing in that mix, still allowing them the ability to flower, especially in maybe a perennial cover crop system whereby those seeds would those plants would have the opportunity to flower and then to seed.
Crimp rolling, tall plants, short plants. Tall ones get rolled, but we leave the short ones to keep flowering. That's what's happening. Would you agree that's a good thing?
Yeah, I would agree with that. More plants you have, easier when they tangle together, easier is to roll them down. Okay, a bigger vegetation, it's easier to roll all the time, and then you're using cover crop as tools. Okay, if you want really to cover, we will go more to cereals like barley, like wheat, or like rye, and have thick straw in that high CN that will decay very slowly in order to keep the cover long. Because if some of the cover crop is low CN ratio, like legume, after months, I mean, they will really get decomposed, and the work of covering the soil will disappear very fast. So, I mean, then each cover crop is a tool. It's why in the design we usually manage each other row a different way, which means that you can have on a side a kind of very heavy cover, which give no fertility but keep the moisture. Then the soil life will still be keeping a flux of fertility to the vine, and then we can have different plants or mix of plant on the other side that will capture fertility at a different time, but will give back fertility at a different time. So like that, you will not stress your vine by growing the same kind of thing and feeding the soil with the same kind of thing, and adding diversity also into your vineyards.
Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question. Gentleman over here.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, all of you. Diversity in selection of type of plant. So co-planting different cépage in the same place. Can you give us an idea of the pros and cons of that to encourage the diversity?
You mean different cultivars in the same stand? I mean, I think it's brilliant, and I do think in regions like this where it's still very young, the eye is going to be drawn by people doing new and unique things, not by leaning very heavily on old and tired things. And so I think, where people have done interplanting, even with other types of fruit, the results have spoken for themselves. And it's the person who stands behind the wine, right? If you're going to do something new and extraordinary, you're going to have to believe that it's new and extraordinary and take people on that journey with you. But I would not hesitate. I think that you are going to have to figure out some solutions to some pretty unique challenges here, and being creative is your best tool in attacking that.
It's probably fair to say it's hard to get out of the mindset of planting blocks that you can farm in the same way, harvest on the same date, and control. And if you interplant, you end up with a bit of a mishmash, and it's hard to tell what's going on. But I have a vineyard in France that's 800 years old, and it's a mixed, what they call a Massal selection. It's a mixture of a field blend, and we love that vineyard, and it grows a very complex mix of grapes. So I think there's definitely a way to do that, but I don't see many English farmers planting 10-hectare vineyards that by mixing up varieties in the same row. It's pretty uncommon.
Just a quick add-on. Is there a translation of Massal? Because I can't find it. That's the English-French question.
Well, Massal selection is the farmer's own selection of their own plant material, of their best vines.
Rootstock taking
making their own grafts, and that's what they used to do before 1900. I don't know when. Massal. Well, Fred, how would you define massal selection? Massal, sélection massal.
Well, I'm not a grape specialist, and I think we had to do at one stage, in what we got on grafting, in order to be able to keep growing vine. And thanks that we have roots coming from the United States that saved ourselves at that time. Probably all varieties, or massal selection could be better. But I go back to what Simon said. If you put them in the same environment, and if you don't bring the outside diversity and you farm the same way, you will face the same problem. It is a kind of dream thinking that everything was good in the old time. They faced a lot of hangers and a lot of problems, and we solved some of them. And we thought that's what we made a mistake by being able to solve some of the problem, that we were clever enough to get away from the diversity. Yeah, but I think up to now we can use some of the technology we have and then manage the diversity into the system to get to a higher level. Not going backwards, going forwards, but differently. It's also why the vineyards at Simon Porter is designed with wide rows. Because if you go back to Burgundy with rows that are wide of 1 meter 10 or 1 meter 20, well, you need special machinery, and it's a bigger challenge to add diversity in the stacked vine, because we only think about vine. When you can drive with a tractor and a drill that you drive in the field, any kind of machinery can go, well, yeah, you can grow everything, put even pumpkins and sheep and chicken, and, well, you don't know yet, and I don't know yet what will happen in this vineyard. But I'm sure, we got 20 more years to work on that, and we will have good surprise about diversity, because diversity is not only plants, it's animals also. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm getting the wind-up sign. We've overrun. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you to my panel. Mimi, Fred, Simon, thank you.